Hey, you're out in the garage with TheEZGZ. I thought I'd try and answer the age-old question of how to get more horsepower out of a Volkswagen engine. And I get that quite often. People have ideas of their own, and some people are just looking for advice and suggestions. And, there's some age-old answers to the age-old question. How fast can you afford to go? There's lots of ways, to equate horsepower. Horsepower generally means going faster. Well, there's a lot of different ways of going faster, and some of that is just plain physics. The power to weight ratio. If your car weighs, all things being equal, if your car weighs less than your buddy's car next to you, then you're probably going to go faster if you're both, got the same driving ability and so forth. And that's true right down the line. Gear ratios. Gear ratios, if you have a 1600 dual port and you've got it on a early transmission with a 437 ring and pinion instead of a 412, it's going to accelerate quicker, and all the gears are the spacing is going to come together a little bit like that. But when you get on the highway, if you're going on a long trip, your buddy's going to have the advantage because he's going to not be creating as much heat in his engine, and he's going to be able to probably go faster at higher speed for a longer period of time, and you won't be able to keep up. So you have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice in order to go faster. If you've got, a stock engine, a small engine, I'm going to keep my comments based more on the 1600 dual port because that seems to be the one that everybody wants. There's nothing the matter with a single port engine, and I've had a few of them over the years in cars that I drove back and forth to work 25 years ago. And they say that those single port heads are real tough, and that those engines, some people claim that they make a little bit more torque, which would be what you'd want for like hard pack trail riding. They weren't much used out in the sand dunes because you needed RPM and you needed more power, and there was more speed parts available for the dual port platform. And that's what you gotta kind of, if you plan it right, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But if you plan it right, if you make wise purchases, they'll last you. My purchases have lasted me 25 years. A lot of the engines that I have are of that age. My 2110 was, all new parts. But I think one of the first performance Volkswagens I got was when I purchased my first sand rail. It had a 1776 on it, and it had a off-road, Baja exhaust, and with a stinger on it, and it had dual 34 ICT Webers on it that were wore out. But we went to some big sand dunes up in Idaho, and there was this one hill called Chokecherry, and we kept trying to go every day. We'd go over there and stop at least once, and we'd try to make it up that hill. And man, I with my son in the car, I couldn't quite make it to the top of the hill. I'd have to go down, and there was a little side trail that would take you back around and get you up to the top. So this one day, it was cool. It was in the morning. It was early, and I had tried to make it up and failed, and I told my son, I says, get out. And because I almost made it. I was like, I don't know, 60 feet from the top, And I told my son, get out and climb up there. I'm going to see how I do without you in the car. And so I made it back to the bottom of the hill, and I did the same thing. I got it in second gear, and I had the pedal to the floor, and man, I was just about ready to run out of power, and I downshifted into first, and I was losing the ground speed, but it was still climbing. It had those big paddle tires on it, and I don't know, I got close to one of those choke cherry bushes and got a little traction from the roots underneath the sand. The sand was a little more stable or something, and all of a sudden I moved forward, and I kept climbing up, and I made it to the top of the hill, and all my friends were standing up there, and they were all cheering and clapping, and man, I thought that was great. Oh man, I made it up to the top of the hill. That made my week. We were out there for a week's vacation, and that going up that hill with that buggy, and there was a lot of guys that couldn't make it. They had some smaller engines and stock transmissions. A lot of us were running stock geared transmissions back then, and boy, it was tough. That was a tough hill. And so the next year, I went back, and I had that same engine, and I had. If I'm remembering this right, I had purchased a set of those Delorto carburetors. I knew those ICT Webers were pretty much wore out, and I looked around at what everybody else was running, and these people had been going to the sand dunes for a lot longer than myself, and I asked them, I said, what do you think? They said, get these Delorto 36 Delortos, get those, they'll be perfect for that engine. And so I did, got them brand new from CB Performance. Took them out of the box, put them on, never had to buy any jets, read the instructions, installed them, and fired that baby up. And that summer we went over there, and I went up that same hill, and I could make it up that hill with my son in the car. That's how much difference that made with the extra weight of my son. Now, I'm not saying everything was exact. It's not like a scientific experiment, because weather conditions and the wetness of the sand, all that sort of stuff. But at least anytime we went over there, I had a good chance of making it up with my son in the car. So I was really pleased on that, and it proved a point, and I still have those carburetors today. So I guess the point of that story is make good investments. Just if you think your chances of going to a swap meet and finding a good set of used carburetors that you can take home and bolt on your engine and have them work like that are about as good as you winning the lottery. It just ain't going to happen. And guys think those carburetors are gold now. Oh, I got some Italian Webers. I got this. I got that. I want $300 for them. I got $400. And at the end of the day, you go back over there and they don't even look the same. They've been picked up and handled and dropped and fondled so much. Maybe they just come in a bucket, and there's all these loose air cleaner parts, and you can buy replacement parts, but I've gone that route, and it seems like you got to buy 2 sets of carburetors to make one good set. Boy, if you can't see everything you need to, you get them home and you take the top off the carburetor, and there's that old fuel that sat in there, and there's all this corrosion inside the float bowl. I mean, you can get a certain amount of that out, but anyhow, you do what you can do. But what I'm saying is it was a lot of money to buy those brand new, and I still got them today. So that was money well worth spending as far as I'm concerned. And from the very get-go, even though I was really hooked on that sand, I always thought in the back of my mind that, gosh, it's expensive to travel to these sand dunes, and I was kind of overextending myself all the time. And then the rest of the time, I had this sand rail at home, and I couldn't drive it on the street. And I eventually found an old worn-out Volkswagen Bug, and got it running, started driving it back and forth to work. And I thought, if I build another engine, now I can take that 1776 and put it in my car and drive it back and forth to work. And that was always kind of my mindset. Don't build or own an engine that is so specialized that I couldn't put it in a daily driver that I could use for goofing around and going back and forth to work. So, I don't know, I'm just giving you some insight on how I got to where I'm at now. But if you take if you put dual carbs, a mechanical advanced distributor, and a free-flowing exhaust, you'll feel it in the seat of the pants. You'll feel the improvement. But you got to have a fairly decent engine to begin with, whether it's a stock 1600 or bigger, I really enjoyed that 1776 for years. Eventually got the 2110, and I like that one too. But most of the time I don't have it in the car because it's just I kind of save that one because I can't afford to build those things, you know, all the time. And you can never sell one for what you spent on it. But get yourself a compression tester. One that separates from the gauge is good, and one that holds the pressure and has a relief valve right over here. That way you can screw the hose on. And the way to do a compression test, it'll tell you on the box when you get it. But on a Volkswagen, you want to take all 4 spark plugs out, have somebody step on the gas all the way down, and that's a good time to check, make sure that your throttle is wide open when you got it floored. With this cable setup that we have on Volkswagens, a lot of times those are out of adjustment and the guy's not even getting full throttle. And you'd be amazed what just, a 1/4 of an inch or something like that will do to open that throttle up and give you, you might be able to, on the way to work, everybody's got one hill that they hate, because if somebody's in front of you and slows you down, then you got to downshift, right? There's always that one hill that's like that. And so you're always hoping that you got an open lane in front of you, and you got it, just like driving a big 18-wheeler, you see the hill, you kind of speed up so that you can make it up the hill. I mean, you do it every day, twice a day, going and coming to work, right? So you know the road pretty good. And, adding performance upgrades and stuff might mean that you don't have to worry about slowing down, and you don't have to worry about that hill at all. But check your compression. And the books will always tell you anything over 100 pounds, anything under 100 pounds compression needs mandatory rebuild or attention soon, and all your compression numbers should be within, a couple pounds or the same. And I've had both kinds of engines. I've had some old cars that I bought, and I've done a compression check on them, and one cylinder might be 95, and then I might have 2 that are 110 and 1 that's 120. Never fails. But the car ran, and it was reliable, and it didn't smoke, and it got me back and forth to work year round. So, just be aware that there's always room for error, and if you spend too much time reading these magazines and stuff and see what the trend is, then you'd be, wanting a turbocharger and stuff like that. And it just doesn't do any good to spend money for a performance part and then put it on an engine that's pretty much worn out. And I know it sounds good, but that's what a lot of guys do. And, if you go to the flea market or swap meets and Craigslist and stuff like that and try buying used parts, if I would much rather pay a little bit more money. If I was going to sell a set of carburetors and want top dollar for them, I'd advertise them with them on my car. I'd say, I got these carbs for sale, come and look at them. And I'd give the guy a ride in my car. And I think that way you would be proven to the person that those carbs are good. Because most of the time you buy these, well, look how expensive they are. $600, $800 for a set of carbs, that's a lot of coin. It's always a coin, especially when you're first starting out, and you got a family and stuff. There's money's tight nowadays. Maybe more so now than ever. I don't know, with the economy being what it is and stuff. But yeah, it just depends on how much you can afford to throw at it. And nobody seems to want to split the engine and go inside and stuff like you'll read about solid rocker shafts, taking the little wave washers off and stuff. That doesn't give you horsepower. If you've increased the spring tension, then you need to have those solid rocker shafts. You don't need to do that if it's just, a stock cam and stock setup. And here's another thing I wanted to point out too. Every engine I've ever taken apart, the cam has been worn out. The first cam and the last cam lobe, that there's 2 valves on every single cam lobe. You got 8 valves in a Volkswagen engine, but there's only 4 cam lobes to operate the 8 valves. That's because they're doing double duty. They've got 2 lifters on every cam lobe on opposite sides of the engine. You got the 2 outside ones for the exhaust and the 2 inside ones for the intake. Now, a Volkswagen cam is a split duration cam, and it has different lift on the intake and exhaust valve. The only performance cam I know that does that, well, there's several companies that make them now. The Eagle cams by CB Performance, they advertise a split duration cam, and Webcam makes them. And I've always been interested in that 218, 219 because it's under 280 degrees duration, which makes your idle a lot smoother. If you have 2 one-barrel carburetors, you can have a cam in it and it'll idle and it'll have a nice lope to it. If you put dual throw carburetors on it, it'll have a smoother idle and make more power, but it doesn't kind of takes that little rough lope that some people seem to associate with cool. And you know, the cool factor, that's whatever you think is cool. Sometimes you might not want what's the best thing. Maybe you want something that just looks cool or sounds cool. Gee, I don't know. You know, a stock muffler, I'm running a stock muffler on my 1776, but I put the big bore tips on them to allow more flow, and that car runs real good. So, I don't know for what it's worth, but it doesn't make a lot of noise, and I don't want a lot of noise in that car. I don't like a lot of noise. The Baja, I've got a muffler on it, and well, the whole car gets noisy above 60 miles an hour going down the interstates, so it almost really doesn't make any difference, but it gets very tiring if you're going on long trips, but most of us aren't. You're going back and forth to school and work and maybe out on an outing with your friends on the weekend if you got time. So, yeah, there's some ideas on some horsepower. You know, when you're putting those performance products on it, it's probably a good idea to go with a vacuum or a mechanical advanced distributor. The old 009 is a great one. And if you're running a single carburetor, center mount carburetor, whether it be single throat or dual throat, probably a vacuum advance or a combination vacuum mechanical advance will get you a little better all-around performance out of it. But yeah, just some thoughts on some horsepower. So it just depends on what you can afford, and you know, things like exhaust, if they're not all bent up and they don't look like they're that old, you know, all rusted out and stuff, then you know, pretty safe bet. But things like a distributor and carburetors and things like that, that's swap meet stuff. Unless you know the history of it, I'd stay away from them. It's just using up your spending money, and eventually you either lose interest and get out of the hobby entirely because you just never succeed, or you end up buying the new product later on down the road and wishing that you'd done that in the beginning, and now you got a bunch of, you hate to sell junk to your friends, but you want to get your money back out of it, and so what do? You rent a stall at the swap meet and hope you find somebody else like you that just buys that stuff. Some of that stuff, I go to the swap meet, you get to know the people over the years, and you know, you'll see this set up here, and you know, then the next swap meet you'll see another guy's got it over here, and it just keeps moving from place to place. These engines are 50 years old, for crying out loud. I think it's time to start accepting the fact that if you're going to build an engine, you should probably start with a new case. And you know, if you've got the receipts for that stuff and you've got a good running engine and you put it in a car and the car runs good, you'll get some of your money back. Gosh, look what's happened to Volkswagens. They've just gotten ridiculous. They become these classic cars instead of just an old cheap car. You know, people want them now. So I wouldn't be afraid to spend money if you really know it's something you want to stick with. And you know, as long as we're on the topic, building a big horsepower car and then attaching it to a 50-year-old transmission that's pretty much wore out anyhow, that's another thing you're going to be having to spend some coin eventually, one way or the other. You're going to have to learn how to do it or pay somebody else a lot of money for a rebuilt one. and there's not as many places rebuilding them as there used to be. So, you know, trying to be happy with what you got and enjoying it is probably a good way to go. And I hope whatever you choose to do is successful for you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subbing. TheEZGZ out.